morning, class. We're going to start off the day by reading a story. The story is called Thank You, Mr. Fokker by Patricia Polacco. Before we begin, I want you all to think about when you first started learning to read. I want you to think about the teachers that taught you, how long it took you before you learned to read. Was it easy to learn how to read? Was it difficult? All right. So as I read, I want you to continue to think about that. So, Thank You, Mr. Fokker by Patricia Polacco. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste." She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. "What is that taste?" said the grandmother. The little girl answered, "Sweet." Then all the family said in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee that made the honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book." The little girl knew that the promise to read was hers at last. Soon she was going to learn to read. Tricia, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them, and whenever she visited the family farm, her grandmother and grandfather would read to her by the stone fireplace. Does anyone else's family read to them? Yep. My family always read to me when I was little, so I also loved books as a young age. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all she hoped to read. Each day she saw the kids in first grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began to read. Not Tricia. She still loves being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do her magic with the crayons. "In first grade you'll learn to read," her brother said. Could anyone read in first grade or kindergarten? Yeah. Oh, good, yeah. Some of you were quick readers. I was not a quick reader. In first grade, Tricia sat at a circle with the other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They said b, boy, boy, and ook, look. The teacher smiled at them when they put the sounds together and got a word right. But when Tricia looked at the page, all she saw were wiggling shapes, and she tried to sound out the words, and the other kids laughed at her. "Tricia, what are you looking at in the book?" they'd say. "I'm reading," she'd say back to them. But the teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn, the teacher would have to help her with every single word. And when other kids moved on to second reader and third reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Tricia began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. I don't think Tricia's dumb. She's just not learning as fast as some of the other kids. And that's fine. Everyone learns at their own pace. The harder words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sit and dream, or when she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandmother were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming out of the grass. As they walked, Tricia said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandmother answered. "To be different is a miracle of life. You'll see all those little fireflies. Every one is different." "Do you think I'm smart?" Tricia asked. Tricia didn't feel smart. Her grandmother hugged her. "You're the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever." Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandmother's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Do you think being different is a bad thing? I don't think being different is a bad thing either. What do you think it would be like if everyone was the same? agree. I think if everyone was the same, it might be a little boring. Being different makes everything better, right? Yeah. Trisha's grandmother used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side, and she used to say that someday she would be on the other side, where the lights came from. One evening they lay on the grass together and counted the lights. You know, her grandmother said, all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass, or it'll lift you off the ground, and you'll be there. They laughed and both hung on to the grass. But it wasn't long after that night that her grandmother must have let go of the grass, because she went to where the lights were on the other side. And not long after that, Trisha's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed to become harder and harder. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Allen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Trisha would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening in their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all. She never added anything right. Line the numbers up before you add them, the teacher would say. But when Trisha tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She knew she was dumb. Then one day, her mother announced that they had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. Even though her grandmother and grandfather were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and kids in the new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and her brother moved across the country in a two-toned 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. Do you guys think that Trisha's going to like her new school better than her old one? Yeah, you think so? Why do you think that? Go ahead. You think that she's going to like it better because the kids won't know she's dumb? Oh, okay. But do you really think she's dumb? No? You're just using her words from the book? We'll see. We'll see if she likes her new school better. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over the words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them, she called on Trisha for an answer. She gave the wrong answer every time. Hey, dummy, a boy called out to her on the playground. How come you're so dumb? Other kids stood near him and laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. I guess it wasn't better than her old school. Do you think it's okay for the other kids to call her dumb and make her feel that way? No? Do you know what that's called when other kids make fun of other kids? Yeah. Bullying, that's right. Yeah. It's not nice. Has anyone else been bullied in their life? No? Yeah. Good. No one's been bullied. Okay. Now Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother. Or, I have a stomach ache. She dreamed more and more and drew more and more. She hated, hated, hated school. Then Trisha started 5th grade. The school was abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants he wore. All the usual teacher's pets gathered around him. Stevie Joe and Alice Marie, Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter. Mr. Fokker was the cutest, or who was the smartest, or who had the best grades. Yep, there's Mr. Fokker. Mr. Fokker would stand behind Tricia whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he would say this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave the wrong answer. Then one day she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She's stumbling through the pages in Charlotte's Web, and the page had gone all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Fokker, in his plaid jacket and butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are you all so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" What do you think Mr. Fokker meant when he said that? Here, I'll read it again. He said, "Stop. Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" So what do you think that means? Yeah, good answer. I agree. It means that nobody's perfect, and you can't make fun of someone for not being perfect because nobody is. That's right. That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He sat behind Tricia for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Tricia didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her, pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face and called her Toad. Tricia was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was happy was when she was around Mr. Fokker. He let her erase a blackboard. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right and looked hard and mean at any kid that teased her. But the nicer Mr. Fokker was to Tricia, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or the cafeteria, or even in the bathroom, and jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Tricia began to believe them. She discovered that if she was to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during free time and not have to go outside at all. That in the dark place, she felt completely alone. It's very sad that Tricia had to hide from the other kids that were making fun of her. Do you all agree? I hope that if anyone else was ever being teased like this at school, they would come to a teacher and tell them. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed, and he pulled her out into the hallway and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, maggoty old dumbbell." Tricia buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Fokker. He marched Eric down to the office, and when he came back he found Tricia. "I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again," he said. When he was teasing you about, what was he teasing you about, little one?" "I don't know," Tricia shrugged. Tricia was sure Mr. Fokker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the other kids next to her were reading, or she would wait for Mr. Fokker to help her with a sentence. Then she'd say the same thing that he had said. "Good," he would say. Then one day Mr. Fokker asked if she could stay after school and help him wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters and you write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. "8," he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Tricia knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw down the sponge and tried to run. Do you think Mr. Fokker was trying to be mean by having Trisha do this activity, writing the letters and numbers on the board in the watery sponge? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think he was trying to be mean either. What do you think he was trying to do? Mm-hmm. You think he was trying to help her? Yeah. Maybe see how she writes the letters? Yes. Yeah. Good ideas. Very good ideas. But Mr. Fokker caught her arm and she sank to her knees. "You poor baby," he said. "You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid," she sobbed. "But little one, don't you understand? You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do. And you've gone through school all this time and fooled many, many good teachers." He smiled at her. "That took cunning and smartness and such bravery." Then he stood up and finished washing the board. "We're going to change that all for you. You're going to read. I promise you that." Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Fokker and Miss Pleasy, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't understand. At first they made circles in the sand, and then big sponge circles on the blackboard, going from left to right, left to right. Another day they flicked letters on a screen, and Trisha shouted them out loud. Still other days she worked with wooden blocks and built words. Letters, letters, letters. Words, words, words. Always sounding them out, and that felt good. But though she's reading words, she hadn't read whole sentences, and deep down she still felt dumb. And then one spring day, had it been 3 or 4 months since they started, Mr. Fokker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of the page and pointed at it. Almost as if it were magic, or if a light poured into her brain, the words and sentences started to take shape on the page. They had never done that before. She marched them off too. Slowly she read a sentence, then another, and finally she read the paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Fokker and Miss Pleasy had tears in their eyes. So all these activities that Mrs. Pleasy and Mr. Fokker had been doing had actually helped Trisha learn to read. That night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went to the living room and found the book on a shelf. The very book that her grandfather had shown her many years ago. She spooned honey onto the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of the book." Then she held the book, honey, and honey all close to her. She felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy, so very happy. Does anyone remember that moment where they could read also? Yeah? Did it make you feel happy? I remember when I first learned to read, it made me very happy. I read all the time. Did anyone else read all the time after they learned? Yeah? Good job. The rest of the years became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know this because that girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Fokker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he had changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. "Why, Mr. Fokker," I answered. "I make books for children." "Thank you, Mr. Fokker. Thank you." So this little girl, Trisha, from the book, was actually the author of this book. Yeah? So now, class, for an assignment, we're going to each write about when we first started to read. So I want you to think back like we did before we read the book and during reading the book, and think about how you started to read. If you had any teachers, maybe like Mr. Fokker, who really helped you, and I want you to write a story about it. So everyone's going to go back to their seats and brainstorm ideas, and I'll come around and help you. Alright everyone, back to your seats.